Here we're showing a profile, but notice that it's the same profile if I log in as Bob, right, or if I log in as Alice. Right? They both navigate me successfully to the profile page, but I would like to show different content for different users. Right? So what we need to be able to do is to somehow pass some parameter and to let this profile know which profile should I display. Okay? So what we might want to be able to do is perhaps pass a parameter here that maybe the ID of the user that has just logged in, perhaps 123 or 234 or whatever, the ID of the user, and then have this profile render the content for that particular profile. Okay? So let's see how we could do that. Notice that if I type that URL, nothing displays because there's nothing mapped to /profile/ whatever. Right? So we can change that. We can change the configuration that says that profile should be mapped to something, right? Profile followed by anything, right? And we can give it a name. We can say that our intention is that there is a user ID after that /profile. But notice the colon in front of it, meaning that this is not a literal string. It's a placeholder, and we're going to give that whatever value is after that first slash. We're going to give it the name user ID. Okay, so it's a named placeholder. Everybody okay? All right, so if I now go back and refresh, notice that indeed it takes me to profile /345. Okay, or whatever I put in here. Whatever I put in there. Doesn't really matter. They all map to that one profile. Yes? Now we need to add some meaning to this parameter. Okay? First of all, we'll need to fix the fact that, notice that the back and forward buttons work just fine, right? Notice that it maintains the history of all these things. That's why it's friendly to the back and the forward button. Let's go back to login page. If I refresh and I log in as Bob, right? Notice that it's broken now because there's nothing mapped to /profile, right? It's actually waiting for /profile followed by some ID. Okay, so let's fix that on the login page. Let's go back to the login controller and say that here when we go to the profile, we really should be going to / plus some ID, right? And the way to do that is maybe, let's see, instead of found equal true, what we could do is what? Let's see, we could do found, instead of it being a Boolean, it could be an object, which initially is null, and then when we find it, found becomes the user object that we just found. Yes? That we have identified, and maybe we do a break. Okay? And here, found here is truthy, right? If truthy, meaning if it's not null, if it's not undefined, if it's not right anything of those falsy statements, then it would navigate to found._ID. Yes? All right? Now, using truthy expression is generally a bad practice. We want to make this explicitly what we really mean is that this is if it's no longer null, right? Not undefined, not empty string, not falsy, explicitly that it's not null, right? Because that's the way we know that we never found the user. Okay, we never found the user. So if it's not null, we assume that we did find the user, and we're going to navigate there. So let's try that. If we refresh and we navigate to Bob, notice that 234 is being passed around. Or if you navigate to Alice, notice that it passes as 123. Everybody okay? All right. So what we want to display here is the content. Why is this showing Alice? Wait, what? 234? Okay, no, it's hard-coded. Good. So notice that it really is the content for each one of these, right? Presumably we want to show Bob, Alice, Charlie, Dan, all those users depending on that ID, right? So let's work on that. Now the view has no idea what that ID means, right? It only knows that it navigated there. The only one who could feed it any data would be a controller. It is a controller responsibility to interpret this URL, fetch the data from a database, right, and then provide this to the view for rendering, right? It's never the view's responsibility. So let's add a controller. Add a controller for that view. Yes. So let's go to user, and just like we have a controller for the login, we're going to have a controller for the profile view, right? Which is going to feed it the data that it needs. So I'm going to copy this. Oops. I'm going to call it the profile controller. Okay, and there it is, profile controller. Before I forget, I'm going to register in my index page. And this is the profile controller. Before I forget, there it is. Notice it's going to be very similar to my login controller. So let's replace this. So this is going to be profile, profile, and profile. We're not going to have an event handler just yet, so we're going to remove that. We will need the same data, right? We're going to need to parse this little piece over here from the URL. Right? We need that little piece from there. Now, who put it there is the configuration file, right? In the configuration file, we configured it, and we actually gave it a name, user ID. Whatever that value is after that slash, right? It's mapped to a placeholder, a named placeholder. So we need to be able to retrieve it. Okay. And notice that all this configuration is part of the routing mechanism, right? That was added by the ng-route library, right? And the ng-route library not only provides us for means to configure this, it also provides for means to parse, right, placeholders from a URL. All right, and to do that, it gives us a service called route params, route params, right? So that we can retrieve all the parameters that are part of the route. Yes, okay. And the only parameter that we have right now is user ID. So route params, what it is that is just a map of all the parameters that might be found in a URL, okay, that have been parsed when you navigate to a particular route, right? So let's associate also this controller that we just created. It's going to be the controller for this particular template. So the controller for this will be our profile controller. And also, we're no longer going to use scope, so we're going to use the controller as syntax, and we're going to refer to it as model. Okay, I like to use the same name that I use here, but it doesn't have to match, right? As long as you follow a naming convention, and we all agree on the names, right? Let's see. So now this controller, right? It's going to be invoked when I navigate to profile user ID. And what we want to be able to do is fetch that user ID from the route params. We can put it maybe var user ID. We can fetch it from the route params, and then it's a map, and we can retrieve the attribute user ID from that map. Okay. Now we have the user ID, and let's do a console to see if we get it. Console log, and let's see if we got the user ID. If we refresh, notice that indeed we are getting the ID right there, 456, or 123, or 234, right? So we are retrieving that ID from the parameter. Everybody okay? All right. What do we want to do? Once we have that ID, we want to retrieve that particular object from the collection. Yes. So let's write a little function to do that. Maybe function find user by ID, and we're going to feed it a user ID. And what this is going to do is just going to iterate over the collection, for var u in users, as we find it, we can return users dot find function user, and we're going to ask for return user dot underscore ID matches the user ID. Right, so this is one of the. All right, so we don't need the for loop here. Okay, so this is the dot find is an array function in JavaScript that's just going to take the users, it's going to iterate over it. Yes, and it's going to pass you each object as it iterates, so that you can then validate which one matches. And then it's going to return the object that matched. Yes, that made this true. Okay? Okay, you can look up there are many different array functions. So let's look it up. Let's look up the user. So we can say var user find user by ID, and we're gonna pass it the user ID, and then we're gonna print out the user object if we find it. Right. So oops. Property find of undefined. What? Users, return users. Users undefined. Find profile client. Let's see. Users, user ID. We have users is undefined. var users. Var users. Why don't you see users?
You're calling your function before you define your user.
Oh, yes, thank you. Yep. There we go. Okay, users. There we go. Okay, so let's run this. And in the console, there it is. We found Bob, right? And if we look for 1, 2, 3, notice that we found Alice. See that? We are finding that object. Each one of them is being printed out. Everybody okay? All right, we found the user. So the only thing that's left to do is to, now that we have the data, is pass it around for the view for rendering. Okay? So let's do that. What we could do is just say what? We could just say model.user. Yes? Model.user. And that's going to be bound now onto the view. So now on the view, on the profile side, we can just render just maybe over here, we can just render model. What did we call it? Model? Is that what we called it? And then user. Right? So if we render, notice that there it is. There is a first name Charlie, right? Or Alice, or Bob. Okay, notice that this is all happening on the client side, right? We're not going to the server for anything. If you look at the network and you clear out, notice that even though I am here changing this, okay, notice that there is no traffic. Right, notice because the page is not being reloaded. Right, we're not going back to the server for any of this. Right, the page has been cached. The HTML that was used to render this has been cached, and we're just manipulating it. Only the first time we need to go to the server to retrieve the profile page, and then after that, any manipulation is being done on the client directly. So everybody okay? Right. So what we need to do is feed all this data to the necessary input fields. Right. So let's remove that, and all the input fields in the profile. Where are we? Where's the profile? Okay, there's the input fields. There they are, right? So here's Alice. Let's add all the nice white spaces that you're going to add for your assignments, right? So that make it easier for the TAs and myself to read your code. So we're going to add here, and we're going to tie this input field to one of the attributes in the object, in the user object. So we're going to tie the value of this input field to the model.user.username. Okay, and the same thing for all the other, like the passwords. Well, not the password actually. First name, we'll do that. Let's tie that to that model. There it is. So that's going to be the first name. So it's going to be first name. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing for the last name. Okay, All right, so let's try it out. And there it is. So we have first name and last name. Wait, same? How come? And the username is Januzzi. Did I misspell it? Oh, okay, yeah. So this is last name. Thank you. There it is. So we have Jose, Januzzi, and the username. Make sense? Everybody okay? All right. So yeah. So that allows us to tie, right, whatever user that you log in, right, tie the username and password and first name and last name to the model that is then used by the view for rendering. If I log out and I log in as Bob, right, I log in and I see the data for Bob, right, or if I log in as Alice, I see the data for Alice. Make sense? All right.